Good morning, good morning, good morning. We are now with part 4 of the Shechinah. A very interesting part as well. But let me just refresh the previous one. We were talking about the Shechinah, the Torah that was destined for the heart of Israel, right? And we know that their hearts were hardened. And so you, as a Gentile, you should never ever complain or mumble when things are going bad, because you have no idea what you have received. Because the Bible clearly says that God will provoke the Jew to jealousy, and that the Jew will experience a hardening, Romans chapter 11, but that hardening will be in part, and Israel, the veil will be lifted, you understand, and then they will all see, all Israel will be safe, for the deliverer will come from Zion. But as a Gentile, you should never complain, because God has circumcised your hearts. And God said to Israel that God will provoke the Jewish nation to jealousy. He will go to a people that is not his own, and he will call them his people. And he's referring to the Gentile nation. And we have no idea what we have received, because the Mashiach, that is the light to the Gentiles, has come to us. And he didn't just come alone. He came with the Ruach Kodesh. He came with the Shechinah, the exact intention that the Shechinah was supposed to destine for the heart of the Jew is now coming into the Gentiles. And it has transformed us, has brought us as Gentiles from Islam, from Judaism, from Buddhism, from Hinduism, from Sikhism, from Satanism, from New Age, from witchcraft, from whatever you were basically being entrapped. He came and brought you to the light, the true light, to be part of the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, to be part of those blessings and basically of those promises that has been made to Abraham. And the Mashiach did that. One Jew did that. And now he just did not do that. He has transformed all of us. No longer are we slave to ourselves, or slave to our former self, or slave to sins, or slave to our former traditions. No, we are totally being transformed, and we paid a massive price. We paid a price because there is a cost of being disciple. We left our previous life, and all of us have been persecuted by our own families, as the Mashiach said. I come with a sword. A man's own household will be his enemy. I come so that a father will be against his own son, and that a mother will be his own son. And you can basically go in here and everybody's testimony. We all have the same testimony. Our families deserted us. Our families basically cut us out of the worlds. Our families have left us. Some of us are, as the Mashiach says, a time will come, people will even kill you and think they do a service to God. Our own families have tried to kill us and murder us because of the decision that we made. There is a cost of being disciple. Just fight the good fight. Just fight the good fight. Keep the faith. Finish your race. Remember, the suffering you're suffering now is not worthwhile with the glory that will be revealed unto us. Today's presentation is a very interesting one. I'm still with the Shechinah. But today you're going to find out that there is something more powerful with the Shechinah. And I'm going to make the connection of the Shechinah. And the Shechinah is connected to the Feast of Tabernacles. Right? So 3 times a year, Jews are supposed to come to Jerusalem. And one of the times is one of these feasts. So after Rosh Hashanah, 10 days after that, they will have Yom Kippur. And after the Yom Kippur, there is a 7-day period in which they will basically be commanded to make this. They have to make a sukkah, and it's a remembrance, right? And how the forefathers were basically be in the desert. And you see that. So this is an interesting, and we are going to talk about how is this connected to the Shechinah, and you will be astonishing, and I hope you will enjoy the secrets that the Ruach HaKodesh is basically giving you related to the Shechinah. And so the Jew is supposed to make this, is to make a tabernacle, right? A sukkah. And You find it clearly in the book of Revelations, especially Revelation chapter 21 verse 3. It's a very interesting statement that they make, and I love that. He says, and I heard a loud voice from the throne was saying, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. Do you see, if we come to the previous parts, you find out that the intention of God, its mission was to dwell with his creation, with Adam in the Garden of Eden. And when the sin came, right, they were forced out, but God has never rejected them. He has hemmed us in and before, and he's laid his hand upon us. He has never rejected us. Can you see that? He always wanted to be Emmanuel, God with us. He always wanted to dwell with us. And one of the ways, if you look at the tabernacle, right, the Mishkan, he went and dwelled with them, right? And here they do it as a remembrance that when they were in the desert to dwell, they have to build this as a remembrance when they were in the desert. Do you understand that? Where Israel basically camped, you understand, with God and dwelled with him in the desert. Isn't that interesting, right? And so here you find that when they made this, God is saying in the Revelations that he wants to dwell with them. And there is a prophetic from Zechariah the prophet, right? A prophetic utterance. And clearly, if you listen to what Zechariah is actually saying in Zechariah 14, that he is prophesying for future events, that the survivors from all nations that have attacked Jerusalem will go up year and year to worship the King, the Lord Almighty, and to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. So you find out that when the Feast of Tabernacles are going to be celebrated, notice even with the nations, even the Goyim, even the Gentiles will do this. And I thought that we are not supposed to do the Torah laws. And here you see that they have been prophetically said that we will all celebrate this, the Feast of Tabernacles. And the Feast of Tabernacles is a remembrance how God basically dwelled with them. Because in Revelations clearly he says a time will come when the voice would saying that now the hour have come for God to dwell with his people. And if you look in the time of Nehemiah, the people from the exile, when they basically left the place, in Nehemiah chapter 8, during the Feast of Tabernacles, something clearly and interesting has been mentioned. The whole company that had returned from exile, they started to build booths, and they lived in them from the days of Joshua the son of Nun until that day. The Israelites had not celebrated like this, and their joy was very great. And I love that, because this is where they say the joy of the Lord is our strength. Because here the commandment for building and celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, the commandment clearly states that you should basically celebrate this feast with joy. It's a commandment. So if you've never experienced joy, the rabbis are saying that you need to go to the Feast of Tabernacles. You see that? So this is a feast that is, and if you look at it, where is that joy comes from? Remember, when I was in heaven, the only way I can experience and explain heaven to you is in the presence of the Lord. There is fullness of joy. That's the only way I can explain heaven to you. And so you find out that once you go and experience and make sukkahs, and go in remembrance and transform and transport you back in the time when Israel was living in the desert with the Lord. Can you see that? He was actually among them, Emmanuel. So they were actually in joy, because in the presence of the Lord, there is fullness of joy. Do you understand that? And so it's in this time, in Nehemiah's time, you understand, actually in the time period of the Feast of Tabernacles, that Moses' fulfillment and of Moses' law, and what that Moses is saying in, if you go and read Deuteronomy chapter 31, Moses is actually literally commanding Israel about this. And what is he commanding them about? Listen carefully what he says to them. He says in verse 10, Deuteronomy 31, he says, verse 10, he says, then Moses commanded them, at the end of every 7 years, Can you see that? During a Shemitah, in the year for cancelling debts, during the Feast of Tabernacles, right? When all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God at the place, He will choose you. You shall read this law before them in their hearing. Isn't that interesting? Assemble the people, men, women, children, aliens, everybody, right? Goyim, and so that they can listen and learn and fear the Lord your God and follow carefully all the words of this law. Their children who do not know this law must hear it and learn to fear the Lord your God as long as you live in the land you are crossing. Clearly, in the time of Nehemiah, when they were celebrating, they say that the Feast of Tabernacles has never been celebrated like in the times of Joshua. Like Joshua and those people were actually the first inhabitants, the first people in the land of Canaan, in the land of milk and honey, that celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles. And now from Nehemiah's time, you can see that almost 32, isn't that, generations, which is a lot, almost 1,000 and something years passed, and they are now transported back to the Joshua incident. You understand? Because they are saying that they've never actually experienced that joy, like the joy that Joshua, and remember when Joshua and his people were basically celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, they all went into the promised land with joy. You understand, into a place of milk and honey with joy. And this joy has never been experienced. And where's that joy comes from? From the Shechinah. What? Exactly, from the Shechinah. Because this that you are building here should transport you back to the times and remembrance when they used to encamp around the Lord. So they experienced that same joy. Can you see that? And Moses are telling them now that they have to do an open reading of the Torah. And so here Ezra would stand and read the Torah. But this sounds very typically if you read King Josiah. So they lost the Torah. What? Israel actually lost its culture. You understand? And somebody, Hilkiah, have been mentioned that there is a book found right in the temple. And they brought the book to King Josiah. You understand? But nobody understand it. They had to find a prophet Huldah to tell them what is this book all about. And she told them, no, that's about Moses. And what Moses read, it was the book of the covenant. And Josiah, the king Josiah, had to tear his robes. And when they publicly, openly reading this, Israel came back. They found their Jewish identity again. Because this is the sole purpose of the Feast of Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles is bringing all the Jews together. And it is actually seen in those stuff that the species that the Jews are carrying in their hands. And if you look at it, there are the Itron, which is the Jewish people that fulfilled mitzvah. Then is the Lulav. Then there is those, you understand, that is learning but are not accompanying its deeds. The myrtle are those who focusing, but they are not pursuing knowledge. And then the willow is just a secular Jew. Do you understand? Is somebody that is not even in the Torah. But by the Feast of Tabernacles, that's why you have this hypocritic thinking, and the hypocrites, the Jew live like a Gentile. But once the high holidays comes, suddenly he's a Jew. He's been reminded that he is a Jew. And he's been included in Israel. He's included by the Orthodox community. They are all happy that the Jews are coming together, because remember, the Shechinah manifest where there is 10, you understand, Jews together. And now you understand when they were in the desert, and then when they leave, they would say, rise. Can you see that? You understand? Interesting. He says, arise. What? Arise. And I noticed that the Psalm is, I think it's Psalm 68. He's saying the exact same thing. Psalm 68. And so you hear the verse 1 that David is actually referring to the same thing. He says, arise, rise up, O Lord. May your enemies be scattered and may your foes flee before you. And there's an interesting statement that they say that whenever they come and rest, and then they say, return, O Lord, to the countless thousands of Israel. That's interesting. So if Israel is the countless thousands of Israel, remember there were 650,000 of them. that left Egypt. And now there is such a lot of Jews and they are in unity, because that is what the Feast of Tabernacles does. It brings all of them in unity. Countless thousands of them. And now the Shechinah basically come to them. And some of the interesting scriptures from Genesis 9, it says that God will dwell in the tents of Shem. Isn't that interesting? And now I understand that Psalm 91 verse 4 is actually related to them. You understand that the Lord, you understand, will basically now hover over them like an eagle. You understand, residing and hover over his cheeks. And you can see, Israel is actually hovering. He says he will gather them under their feathers and under their wings. They will find protection. So you see that clearly, that Psalm 91, that once they read that Psalm 91, it's actually referring to the angel of the living God that is basically was in the tent. Isn't that a very, 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 very interesting? And that angel of the Lord, if you look at the Sukkah 91, Gematria is exactly the same Gematria as the wings of an eagle, the wings of this angel of the Lord. Can you see that? The wings of this angel of the Lord that is protecting them. Do you understand? Because God says that he will basically have them, you understand, riding them like wings. Isn't that? He will gather them like wings. Now I found that astonishingly accurately, the way he is basically explaining that to us. You can't get a more accurate one. You understand that the eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are his everlasting arms. So you see his feathers, under his feathers you find refuge, and you will gather you under his wings. Can you see that? And that wings is the same gematria as the sukkah. So when you're under the sukkah, you understand, you are actually literally under the angel of the living God. Can you see that? So the Feast of Tabernacles is actually focusing on the angel. And we know the angel of the Lord is the source of the Shechinah. So they live in the Shechinah, and that's where they get that joy, because in the presence of the Lord there is fullness of joy. And can you see that? So the sukkah is bringing them actually to the joy. Isn't that interesting? And if you look at Revelation chapter 7, you find these people, they had these palm branches in their hand, and they were dressed in white with these palm branches that they were basically had in their hands. Multitude from all nations and from all tribes. You understand? They were actually, the palm branches reflecting that they were actually having the Feast of Tabernacles in heaven as well. And there's joy in heaven, like the same joy that you have, you understand, living in the sukkah, the same joy that you will have in the temple, the same joy because you are in the Shechinah. So that the Shechinah is connected to the Feast of Tabernacles. Because if you want to experience joy, you have to experience the Feast of Tabernacles, to be in the presence. And now you can see that all of them, can you see that? You see this eagle wings. You see these wings that Hezekiah is actually referring to. Interesting. Hezekiah says God who sits enthroned between the cherubim, because these wings that Bezalel from the previous presentation, Bezalel had to make the ark, the cover of the ark, the kapareth, he has to make it like what he's seen in heaven. Can you see that? Because God said that you will reside there. That's why the priest could not just come. Can you see that? Because that is where the Shechinah, and it's an interesting, that's actually the place of prophecy. What? Because you cannot prophesy if you're not in the Shechinah. Remember, this is where the boy literally slept. You understand? We find literally that this boy was sleeping right here by the name of Samuel. Now, how did he survive that Shechinah and didn't die? Because I remember his mother made him an effort. So his mother also gave him the priestly garments to protect him against that Shechinah. Can you see that? And then it's interesting that when the boy came, there was actually a famine. What? Yes, there was a famine, because Amos saying that a time is coming that God will bring a famine, but not by water or food. You understand? It is a famine of hearing the word of God. So in the times when Samuel was born, there was a famine in Israel. They said that the word of God was scarce. People were fleeing around. There was no word until this boy was born. And this is where the boy got his his inspiration, right? Because everybody knew that Samuel was a true prophet. Can you see? Because Samuel knew where to find the source of prophecy. So Samuel, you find out, you walk from altar to altar. And what are altars? Hamakoms. Thank you. That's the place of the Shechinah. Can you see that? And so the boy should have died because he was in this presence. He slept in the power of the Shechinah. Can you see that? And you know that Israel says clearly, Leviticus 16, that the priest will die if he comes there. So this is the source of. But did you know something happened to the ark? The ark of the covenant that was always carried. And so they say the Philistines came and they took the ark. And then when they took the ark, then all these plagues came upon the Philistines. And something interesting happened. You understand? They brought the ark back. And then people started to die. You understand? Because they touched in the ark. And there's an interesting thing that happens. A man by the name of Obed-Edom, the guardian of the ark. And Obed-Edom, he took the ark. And the Bible says the ark reside in Obed-Edom's place. The ark reside there. Because King David was fearful. Why? Because King David heard that the people died. And King David wanted nothing to do with the ark. And so the ark reside there. And they said that the man was blessed. Now when I was thinking like, this man has the ark. Why did Obed-Edom not die? Because the ark is in his house. When we know that the priest can only go there once a year. And he has to go to ritual purification. You understand? Otherwise he would die if he comes unannounced. But this man and his family had no problems. You understand? Unless this Obed-Edom, he must have been a priest. Because do you know that this was the neighbor of that giant Goliath? What? Exactly. They say Obed-Edom was from Gath. And remember, Goliath was from Gath. Oh my word. That's why Golgotha comes from that. You understand? Golgotha is related to Goliath. You understand? It's the place of the skull. It's the place where King David went and buried Goliath's skull. Now Goliath was from Gath and Obed-Edom is also from Gath. Now was he a Gentile? Because how can you have the ark? Because people just died. And so now if you go and read that he's in the priest, his family is also part of those priestly, you understand, 24 people. And he was rewarded. And I love from the Talmud that they say that the man became like a gatekeeper. His family became gatekeepers of the temple. And that's what King David says, I would rather be a gatekeeper in the house of God than to live in the tents of the wicked. But when King David heard that the man was blessed, the Lord blessed his household. David was very jealous, you understand, and he said, no, from Kiriath Jearim, please people, bring that ark back. And so they brought the ark back. And you hear what King David did, and that's what people are doing when they're in the presence of the ark. They become devoured by the presence. The man basically went and took off his clothes and went and danced, and even his wife was embittered. Can you see that? And now something very interesting. Remember we're doing the Feast of Tabernacles. And how is the Feast of Tabernacles connected to the Shechinah? You won't believe when Solomon inaugurated the temple. What? At the Feast of Tabernacles. What? Exactly. Because remember the Feast of Tabernacles. If you stay in that sukkah is supposed to transform you. Do it in remembrance. It transforms you back in the time when the Lord used to reside with him. And once you reside in them, the presence of the Lord, that's why you have this joy. So here you have exactly the same thing. The temple was basically inaugurated in the times of the Feast of Tabernacles. And you hear that the priests couldn't even do their work because of the kavod, the glory of God. The glory of God filled the house. And why would it fill the house? Because I said, that is what happened during the Feast of Tabernacles. This is exactly what is happening. Now you, me, and everybody's just experiencing joy. That's why if you've never experienced joy, go to the Feast of Tabernacles. And you see clearly now that the Feast of Tabernacles is actually associated with the Shechinah. And the Shechinah has now manifested in this temple in the most powerful way. And that's why the people had this joy. I love in Josiah's Pesach, they say the Pesach was never been the same as in the times of Solomon. Why in the times of Solomon? Because look at the times of Solomon, how the Shechinah manifests. Here you have 3 times a year the Jew is supposed to come here. So you know this, rise, may your enemies be flee and may they be scattered. But once they go and rest, I love what they now are saying. He says, come now to the countless thousands of Israel. So if army Israel is like more than 650,000, then the Shechinah starts to manifest. Now at the Feast of Tabernacles, all the Jews are here. The secular ones, the Orthodox ones, those who are Pharisaic ones, all the Jews are united. So that's why the Shechinah is coming. Bam! Can you see that? In power. So isn't that interesting? That the Shechinah is actually connected, and it's in this time that they have an open reading of the Torah that Moses is saying at the Feast of Tabernacles, when it is actually the Shemitah. So there is a sabbatical, which means you are for an entire year, Sabbath. We have a Sabbath day where we reset and rejuvenated ourselves for one day. But at the Shemitah, the 7th year, or even at the Jubilee, 7 Shemitahs, you are resetting for a whole year. What? You are actually resetting for an entire year. You spent in this kavod, reading the Torah, studying the Torah. For an entire year, you rejuvenate yourself. For an entire year, you spend time with God in the Shemitah. For an entire year, can you see that? For an entire year, you are going to dedicate yourself in open reading of the Torah. For an entire year. And that's what happened with Nehemiah and his people, because the Feast of Tabernacles is associated with the Shechinah. Does that make sense? Yes, but now the prophet is saying something interesting. He says, Amos says, a time will come where the Shechinah will just disappear. What? I read it somewhere in Jeremiah. I think it's Jeremiah, I'm not sure. I speak under the correction that Jeremiah says that the people will basically lose the ark. What? There's not going to be an ark. So if there's no ark, there's not going to be a Shechinah. What? So that's the same as in Eli and Samuel's time. Do you understand? They say the word of the Lord was scarce. There was no Shechinah. Now, what? And so now you understand the Amos presentation, because when these people were doing the open reading, can you see that? The Ezra people. When Ezra and Nehemiah and the exiles, can you see? Because there was not a lot of them. And Ezra were, the Feast of Tabernacles, they were reading, open reading of the Torah. And they had a temple. And this was the second temple. And so now you notice that the second temple did not have this. What? Yes, that's the sad part. The second temple did not have this. Because I think it's 23,000 to be exact. You understand, as a guesstimation. 23,000. They were not in the 650,000 Jews. You understand? So come to the countless thousands of Israel and come and rest. No. That's why the second temple did not have this. Can you see that? So it did not have this, the glory, the kavod, the manifestation of the Shechinah. It did not have this. And you can clearly see how Haggai is actually literally referring to that. And how is Haggai literally referring to that? Listen to Haggai's exact words so that you can understand what Haggai is talking about. I'm going to read it from you, and you hear he says, speak to Zerubbabel the son of Joachim the governor, and speak also to Joshua the son of Joshua the high priest, and ask the remnant of Israel, ask them, who of you is left who saw this house in his former glory? How does it look to you now? Can you see that? So they didn't have this glory because the ark was not there. But does it not seem to you like nothing? But be now strong, Zerubbabel. And I love what he says. Be strong. I love it. Because he clearly says that the glory of this present house will be greater than the glory of the house. Verse 9. The glory. So in the future, when the Mashiach comes in the Messianic era, the Mashiach who is the Kavod, who is the Shechinah himself, and he will come into the temple, then the glory of that temple will be greater than the glory that you have in the highest temple, in the second temple. So the second temple, it lacked this glory because there was actually no ark. What? Exactly. So you have a dilemma. Can you see that? So these people, they did. Nehemiah and Ezra and his people, they did celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. Can you see that? And they did celebrate it with joy, but the glory was not in the temple of the Lord. May God bless you. I'm ready for the next part. I'm still excited, and I hope you're excited, and see you for the next presentation.